You're listening to The Briefing, first broadcast on the 8th of November 2024 on Monocle Radio. Hello and welcome to The Briefing, coming to you live from Studio 2 here at Midori House in London. I'm Andrew Muller. Coming up on today's programme.
Let me also express my tremendous appreciation for Susie. Come here, Susie. The Ice Baby. We call her the Ice Baby.
One glass ceiling does get cracked. The White House will have its first female chief of staff. Also ahead. Israel scrambles El Al aircraft to retrieve Maccabi Tel Aviv fans from Amsterdam after anti-Semitic violence. Later in the show, unabated anger in Spain over the response to recent floods, and a look at what went right with election security as America voted. Plus, we'll wrap up the latest news from the world of cinema. That's all coming up right here on The Briefing on Monocle Radio. And welcome to today's edition of The Briefing with me, Andrew Muller. US President-elect Donald Trump has named his first significant pick to his new administration. His White House chief of staff will be his campaign manager, Susie Wiles, who will be the first woman to hold that role. In an interregnum of uncharacteristic silence from Trump, speculation is naturally growing about who is being lined up to fill out his cabinet. Names being floated include former CIA Director Mike Pompeo, possibly as Secretary of Defense, and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. for some role associated with health, despite views on the subject which might be charitably described as unorthodox. Well, joining us now from Washington, D.C. is Associate Professor of Sociology at UCL, Katie Gaddini. Katie, first of all, Susie Wiles, what do we know about who she is and how important to Trump she has been?
Yeah, so the main thing to know about Susie Wiles is that she has a long history in politics. So this isn't somebody that was plucked from business or from another sphere, let's say like Elon Musk. This is someone who's been in the game for a really long time. She's been involved in politics starting in DC in the 70s, and she's really worked her way up. She's been involved with other campaigns, and she's been involved in Florida politics, which is important because we're starting to see more and more picks and favorability from Trump with others from Florida.
I mean, is there a clear line on what influence she's had behind the scenes? Because Trump's campaign, successful though it obviously was, became noticeably less disciplined and more Trump-like the longer it went on.
Yeah, we know she's been involved in helping him campaign for the last 4 years. So she's had a significant influence, and she's had a successful influence in terms of getting him reelected and decisively reelected. Some are chalking up his behavior in the last few weeks of the campaign as kind of tiredness. He really went off script. Stress around the election. So it's kind of unclear if the kind of old Trump was emerging, or if this was just kind of a fluke.
I mean, is it necessarily curious that we have heard relatively little of Donald Trump since he claimed victory on Tuesday night? He is not reticent at the best of times, and one might have assumed that in this, his great hour of triumph, he might have been a bit more present.
Trump is showing us that he's going to do this administration differently, and I think we can expect that on a number of fronts. So first of all, he's not picking someone who's necessarily in the public eye as chief of staff. He's picking someone that he's known for a while, he trusts, who's been out of the limelight but successful. He isn't coming on stage and making a lot of flagrant comments. I think we're going to see a more serious Trump administration, and we're going to see one that doesn't have the restrictions that he did the first time.
When you say more serious, do you mean more seriously Trumpist, or more serious in terms of, I guess, conforming to what ideas people had of a certain Republican orthodoxy? Because last time round, most of his initial cabinet, at least with the obvious exception of General Michael Flynn, were fairly orthodox-ish figures, the kind of people you could imagine most any Republican president-elect picking.
I mean, we know to that point, in terms of being unorthodox, we know he's promised to make Elon Musk and RFK part of his administration. Now, it's not clear if they're going to have formal roles and titles or just behind the scenes influence. But I wouldn't doubt if they are part of this administration. I think more serious as well in terms of, he's been in politics a lot longer now. The first time around was his first entrance into politics on a big scale. And now he's been in the game a lot longer. And he knows what it takes to get certain policies pushed through and who he needs to help him do that.
One of the things we still don't know about this election is who will have control of the House of Representatives. How big a difference is that going to make to his calculations around what he might be able to do?
The big difference insofar as right now the Senate is in Republican control. The Supreme Court has a Republican supermajority. Trump won not only the Electoral College, but the popular votes. It's a really clear mandate. And if the House also retains Republican control, there really are no guardrails for Trump in terms of the checks and balances that are inherent in our system.
What are we figuring out, though, about how he did this? Does anything leap out at you from the demographic breakdowns of the votes? It is fairly clear that quite a few demographic cohorts that the Democratic Party thought they had locked up turned out to be a little more unpredictable than that.
The thing that stands out to me is the breadth that Trump captured, that he was able to reach across, not just white working class men, which was credited with his first election. He was able to galvanize Latino voters, Latino men, Black men, younger voters. These are populations we don't necessarily expect to see go over to the Republican side. And I think the breadth can be down to the fact that he had a really clear message. And one of those messages was the economy. And that was something that was top of mind for voters from various different demographics.
I mean, is there any means of explaining how many women in particular were willing to overlook the obvious where Trump was concerned?
This is something I look at in my research. My research is with conservative women, but also moderates as well. And Trump gained with women from 2016 to 20 and from 20 to 2024, even with a woman presidential candidate. So this says a lot. And I think what I'm seeing in my research as well is that the economy was also top of mind for women voters. I think the Harris campaign bet on the fact that they'd be worried about reproductive rights, and they centered their campaign on that. And it turns out women are concerned on that on a state level, but when it comes to a president, they also are concerned about high inflation. They want a president that they think can fix that, and they turn to Donald Trump, a former businessman, to do the job.
Katie Gaddini at UCL, thank you for joining us. You're listening to The Briefing. Here is Laura Kramer with the day's other headlines.
Thanks, Andrew. At least 17 Palestinians have been killed by Israeli airstrikes in Gaza. Meanwhile, in Lebanon, Israeli attacks also continue in the south, where officials say more than 50 people have died in the past day. In California, a wildfire in Ventura County has destroyed more than 130 buildings, mostly homes. The fire, which started Wednesday, has burned more than 80 square kilometers, and its cause is still unknown. And the 2025 Grammy nominations will be announced today. Many are watching to see if Taylor Swift's latest album gets her another Album of the Year nomination, which would make her the most nominated woman ever in the category. Those are the day's headlines. Back to you, Andrew.
Thank you, Laura. You are listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. Dutch Prime Minister Dick Schoof has promised the pursuit and prosecution of people who last night attacked Israeli football fans visiting Amsterdam. At least 62 people have been arrested, 5 reported hospitalised. The fans had travelled to watch Maccabi Tel Aviv play Ajax in a Europa League match. El Al, Israel's flag carrier airline, has sought and received permission from the chief rabbis to fly on the Sabbath so that 2 aircraft can be dispatched to bring the Israelis home. Well, joining us now from Amsterdam is the journalist Chennai Bostash. Chennai, first of all, what is the latest?
There's a press conference going on right now where the Mayor of Amsterdam and the Chief of Police and the Public Prosecution are giving the latest update on things. What they have just said is they've confirmed that 62 people were arrested. They said that 5 Israeli fans were taken to hospital wounded but are out now, and that between 20 and 30 have been sent to Amstelveen, a nearby suburb of Amsterdam, to presumably get help. They also confirmed that there were 800 police out there, 6 teams of riot police specialists to try to deal with this. And the mayor of Amsterdam, Femke Halsema, has utterly condemned it. She said it's a black night. It brings back memories of the pogroms, an absolute scandal for Amsterdam. And she's described the people responsible for this violence as rioters and criminals.
So that is the line the Dutch authorities are taking. They're not attempting to kind of play this down as any sort of football hooliganism.
No, they're taking it extremely seriously. She's condemned it absolutely, and she said that in a city like Amsterdam, this kind of violence is completely un-Amsterdam. There's another context to this, of course. In the Netherlands during the Second World War, three quarters of the Jewish population was murdered by the Nazis, and there are a lot of facts and figures that are emerging from those times about the complicity of the Dutch state in that period. So this is an extremely sensitive topic in the Netherlands, and there is absolute support for the victims. She's calling them their guests in our city. She says it's absolutely scandalous. There is no way to relativize this kind of violence of these hit-and-run kids on scooters managing to evade the police, linking up via Telegram. She described some of the messages that were going around on Telegram, hunting Jewish people, and said it's absolutely shocking.
I'm pretty confident the answer to this question is yes, but have we heard from Geert Wilders, who, though he is not the Prime Minister, is the leader of the largest party in the Dutch Parliament?
Yes, of course. We've heard from him. He is a supporter of Israel, and he has called immediately for a parliamentary debate on this and utterly condemned these attacks. We have heard from other people talking about actions of Israeli football fans. There was some riotousness the night before, some incidents on the dam where a Palestinian flag was pulled down and burnt. But the line from Amsterdam, the line from the Amsterdam mayor, is that there is absolutely no relativizing what this is. This is criminal action, and the authorities will stamp down hard on it.
Had there been much in the way of previous indications of this kind of thing in Amsterdam? Obviously, the war in Gaza over the last 13 months has occasioned protests, some of them violent elsewhere in the world. Had that been going on much in Amsterdam as well? And had there been associated fears around the safety of Jewish people and Jewish institutions?
Yes, there have been protests, some violent protests in Amsterdam. At the opening of a National Holocaust Museum earlier this year, there was simultaneously a protest there, and there was some criticism about how that ended, and some level of intimidation towards the Jewish community who were attending the opening of the National Holocaust Museum. There was another protest a few weeks ago, which was not entirely peaceful, and our friend Geert Wilders was quite critical after that and suggested that the mayor of Amsterdam should be put out of the country as well as the protesters. So yes, there is a context of protests and super strong feeling and polarization on the debate about the Middle East in the Netherlands. And there's also, let's not forget, a massive history in the Netherlands and in Amsterdam in particular of football hooliganism, which people are incredibly concerned about, which has been on the rise in recent years, and is another element.
And just finally, does this seem like the kind of thing that might put any sort of dent in Dutch-Israeli relations? Obviously, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in Israel is not being slow to attempt to make capital for himself out of this.
Well, whether or not it affects relations between the two countries is hard to say. I suppose it depends on the reaction of the authorities, but there's no sense that anyone is not taking this extremely seriously. The fact that all these videos are going around of the incidents, of course, make it easier for people to identify some of the perpetrators. So I don't see that it would affect national relations. But the mayor of Amsterdam has pointed out that she's not in a position to judge how this is responded to in Israel. She can completely understand that people are extremely emotional after a year of war, and that this is for The Hague. This is for the national politicians to talk to each other about.
Shania Boztash in Amsterdam, thank you very much for joining us. You're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. Tuesday's US presidential election sparked all manner of threats to election workers before the result, but actually went quite smoothly on the day and in the aftermath. And while this may be at least partly down to the decisive victory of the man who was sowing the most distrust in the process, it was also thanks to the efforts of election officials to improve that process over the last 4 years. Monocle's Chris Chermak spoke to Tina Barton, an elections expert and member of the Committee for Safe and Secure Elections. Chris began by asking Tina for her impressions of Election Day.
Well, certainly I think that a lot of planning had been put into place. And a lot of training had been done over the last 4 years. And so I think there was this anticipation of, will all the things that we trained for, planned for, play out from a security perspective. And we did see some of those things happen. We saw attacks on, ballot drop boxes. We saw some bomb hoaxes being called in, some handful of, confrontations between voters or poll workers. Most of those appeared to be related to campaign apparel. So there were things that we had done tabletop exercises around, scenarios that we did see play out, but there were also things that we didn't see happen. And I really think that it's the concerted effort of the training, the established, relationships that we saw with law enforcement and election officials, and really even to the help of the media to draw attention to the level of threats and abuse and harassment that election officials received in 2020.
Another aspect of this, I guess, was, what was going to happen after the actual voting. And that was really about also the counting of the votes. Tell me a little bit about how that went from your perspective. Obviously, the fact that a result was called relatively early probably helped. If things had gone longer, that might have been where some of the tense situations at polling stations might have developed. But tell me still about what kind of things were put in place to ensure that there was also trust in the count.
Well, certainly election officials always say as they're heading into Election Day that they hope for high turnout and wide margins. And that's always helpful, right? When there's a wide margin in a win that people see it gets a little hairier, if you will, the closer it gets. What I would say that we've seen that made it so much better this time is actually several factors. One of those being education. I think since 2020, voters have wanted to be more educated about the process. Political parties have wanted to be more educated, and election officials have gladly done so. They have opened up their offices in transparency. They've put more things out on their website, sharing more information, trying to kind of feed that hunger of the public to want to know what is actually happening and why it's happening that way. So I think there's been a really great effort put towards education as well as transparency. I think we've also seen some changes legislatively, whether it was also through proposals put place in different places in the country that specifically I can talk to here in Michigan. And the difference, that we saw, I think, between 2020 and 2024 and here in our state in particular was the implementation of early voting. And having early voting really took the pressure off of Election Day. So that you weren't trying to fit so many people into Election Day, causing long lines, that sort of thing. But it also meant that when the polls closed, those early voting numbers were going to be available much sooner than if you had sent everybody to the precinct and you still had people in line. The other thing that we implemented here in Michigan, which was helpful in a battleground state, besides the early voting, was pre-processing. We did not have that in 2020. So we had to wait until, basically election morning to start putting ballots through a tabulator that were the absentee ballots. Michigan opened up pre-processing here. And so the clerks in our state were able to start processing absentee ballots sooner. That also allowed the numbers to get posted quicker. So I think a lot of things happened over the last 4 years. We looked at each part of this process and the administration of it and said, how do we get better? What were we not doing really well that maybe was something we should take a look at? And how do we get more transparent? And how do we provide more education? And so all of those concerted efforts together and this focus on security, I think, has been really the success story of this election cycle.
One thing that CSSE did as well was put out a pretty strong ad just before the election, basically warning people not to either get violent or threaten election officials. And it was a very powerful ad from the law enforcement side, telling people of the consequences as well. And I wonder how much of an impact you think that had, simply telling people, if you are going to do something, if you are going to threaten election poll workers, there are going to be consequences to that.
Well, I certainly think the ad was incredibly powerful. And the fact that we had over 2 million views of those PSAs that we put out, I think, is also really powerful. And just that statement alone, not in America, reminding people, above all else, you might be a Republican, you might be a Democrat, you might be a Libertarian, whatever it might be. But at the end of the day, we're all Americans, and we don't do that in America. We don't threaten our officials. We don't harass them. We don't, say that we're going to kill them when they least expect it. Any of those things. That happens in other countries, not in America. In other words, let's set the standard of this not being acceptable in our country, because it's not. And if you do it, there will be consequences. And we have seen over the last couple of years where the DOJ has been very successful in prosecuting and getting prison time for individuals who have chosen to test that as to whether or not there would be consequences, and there have been. And I think even the publication of some of those cases being out in the press, I hope those too have also been a deterrent.
Now, Tina, I do have to ask, because it might be easy in some ways to say that a measure of trust has been restored in these elections simply because, quite frankly, the side that had been sowing the most distrust has now won. But even so, do we imagine going back to a kind of degree of normalcy now, or do you feel like there are more steps that are going to be taken when you look back at this election to really ensure that also in 2 years and 4 years' time, we can avoid the kind of distrust that we had heading into this one?
We can always get better. There are always lessons to learn. There are always processes that we can tighten up, ways that we can engage the public more. I don't think we put our foot off the gas when it comes to those things. I think we have this responsibility as election officials to continue this path forward that we're on, because I think we see that it was successful this time. But you know what? There are still people out there who don't believe, who are suspicious, all of those things, and who want proof, and that's okay. And so we need to still be willing to provide those things and not look back and say, hey, they, the side that was the most suspicious, they're the ones that won. So now we can go back to, not having open houses, not sharing as much information, all of those things. I don't think that's the case. I think we have to look at this. Hey, these things worked really well. How do we do them even better and on a larger scale as we move forward? So it's always getting better. And I think election officials are really good at that and really committed to it.
That was Tina Barton, election security expert, speaking to Monocle's Chris Chermak. This is The Briefing. You're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. It is a little over a week since eastern Spain was inundated by the worst floods in living memory. The waters have largely receded. The associated rows about the causes and the response have not. At least 218 people are now known to have been killed, and public anger has been considerable. Even King Felipe had an attempt to console subjects in person, answered with angrily flung fistfuls of mud. Well, joining us now from Madrid is the Times journalist Graham Keeley. Graham, what sense do we now have of the scale of the damage? Most people will have seen those extraordinary pictures collected by news crews, but how widespread is it?
Well, it's very widespread indeed. We have thousands and thousands of kilometres worth of land covered still in thick mud. It's going to be a very long job for the recovery teams to comb the area for missing people. And then, of course, there is the construction work to be done to put people's lives back together. That is reconstructing their homes, reconstructing roads, and all that goes with it. So obviously we're looking at months and months of work on putting Valencia back together as it was before.
And where is the political row at? Does it seem to be the case that either warnings or responses to the flooding were inadequate?
The political row is very much alive. Basically, what it centres on is whether the regional government issued an alert warning to people's mobile phones early enough. They put this warning out at 8 o'clock on the night of the floods. This was at least a couple of hours after the flash flooding had started. Now, experts have told me that they believe this was too late, and that if it had come earlier, then people may have been able to do something to rescue themselves or to put themselves in a better situation, that is to get to higher ground and not to try, as has happened, to go and rescue their cars, which was precisely the wrong thing to do. A lot of people were carried away in cars or drowned in their cars. And of course, this is what happened when the alert went out. If they had had this alert earlier, perhaps they would have remained in their homes and not taken this move. Now, the regional government have said, look, we put out a series of alerts earlier on over the weekend. But what's emerged overnight is that a senior figure in the government was not aware that these alerts existed until the evening of the flooding and had to be informed by an official in the Valencian government. So, as you can see, it's all very heated, and it will be more so tomorrow when there is a large demonstration calling for the resignation of Carlos Mazón, the regional leader.
I mean, how worried about the anger is the national government, Pedro Sanchez's national government? And I guess I'm wondering specifically in the Spanish context, how out of character is a scene like the actual king getting pelted with mud and heckled?
It's very unusual. This kind of scene hardly ever happens. The only other incident of something like that was during the Catalan independence crisis, when the king travelled to Barcelona to remember the victims of a terrorist attack, and he was booed by people in the crowd who were pro-independence, but nothing like him being pelted with mud and people yelling assassins at himself and the Queen. But you've got to remember that these jibes were levelled at the politicians, not the royal family. They have a symbolic role, nothing more. They cannot order the army or the police to go in and act in a situation like this. No, what's really worrying for the national government is the fallout from this. They have been perceived to have acted to or responded too late and left things to the Valencian government, whereas people feel that they should have sent the troops in large numbers and police in large numbers and coordinated the response better, faster. There's a real feeling amongst people in Valencia that everything's been left to volunteers.
Graham Keeley in Madrid, thank you very much for joining us. You're listening to The Briefing. You are listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio with me, Andrew Muller. It is time now for a wrap-up of film news, and I am joined in the studio, literally just sitting down right now, by Karen Krizanovich. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. I'm digging your shirt.
Well, thank you.
It's very nice. I wish listeners could see it. It's really cool.
I do my best. We did start this episode talking about Tuesday and the ramifications thereof. Am I right in supposing that the election result has been met with something other than untrammeled joy in Hollywood?
Yeah, Hollywood wasn't big on Trump, actually, from Bette Midler. Well, I mean, Jeff Bezos obviously was different, a little bit of a different, different voice. Bette Midler, of course, was quoting Mencken, saying, and the White House will be adorned by a downright moron. Now, that's not hers. That's a
H.O. Mencken.
And Billie Eilish also came out as saying it's a war on women. Kerry Washington, this is not a mirage. And Cusack, which John Cusack put it out on X and then deleted it, said, yes, the fact that the country would choose to destroy itself by voting at a convicted felon rapist and a Nazi is a sign of deep nihilism, to put it mildly. But he deleted that. So,
yeah, well, probably to be expected on balance. But the film world does go on. There are films still coming out, and you are here to talk about some of them.
I am. I mean, Hollywood is a little worried about the Chinese market, obviously. But now they're also saying that this election was won by influencers. So this is another ramification of media changing. But let's talk about the films that we do have coming out, which are very, well, we got some good ones. Award season is ramping up, of course, and that means that you're going to be looking for things that are going to be Oscar nominated or BAFTA nominated. Those are coming up as well. We've already had the British Independent Film Award long list, I believe, is shaping up now. But this week, well, things that people are talking about are the Colin Farrell drama Small Things Like These, the Hugh Grant horror movie, Heretic. Yes, I know, Hugh Grant horror movie. And also Demi Moore and Margaret Walley, who is both wonderful in The Substance. So those are three that you really should write down. But this week, we see Paddington in Peru, the fourth part. I love your face.
Are we up to 4 of these already? So Paddington in Peru, do I glean that the basic premise of this is that he has gone back?
Yeah, he's Peruvian. Yeah.
Well, this much on you. Do we know why he's gone back?
No, there's some sort of.
Has he just got tired of the weather?
There's a really good reason why he went back, and that's because they needed a fourth film. So, but it's a fun film, and let's not forget that Paddington 3 was really quite amazing because Hugh Grant was so good. So, and it's got a wonderful cast, and there's a good reason for going to get you to the cinema. For the more serious filmgoers, those who like their social realism on a slightly hyper-realistic or magical realistic take, there's Bird, the Andrea Arnold drama starring Barry Keoghan. Well, now, I didn't enjoy this film. It's a real divider. You're either really going to like it or really not like it.
What did you disenjoy about it?
Well, number one, I'm a little tired of Barry Keoghan, actually. He's been in lots and lots of things. You wonder who he is. He's the guy from The Banshees of Inisherin. Okay, you'll know him from lots of other, and also Saltburn. I don't. The social realism is not really what I want to see in a film. Not always. Sometimes it just seems very ordinary to me. Like, this looks like something I could go to a suburb of London and just see. So I don't. For me, that's not cinema. I want a little bit of escapism. I want a little bit of a story, and that's why I'm saying The Piano Lesson by Malcolm Washington, who is Denzel Washington's one of his sons. His debut film, which is on Netflix, I think it's this week, is actually really, really worth a watch. It's a beautifully done film. It's kind of a historic, I think it's set in the 1930s, and it stars his brother David and other really wonderful performers like Danielle Detweiler, who was so good in, I'm blanking on the movie now, but she's a wonderful performer. It looks amazing, and for a debut film, I think it's a great story as well.
And it says here that you want to talk about Wicked.
I would. But next week is Gladiator 2, which I'll be talking about when I come back on Friday. And that's also out along with the Vatican thriller thought you'd like that. Conclave, starring Ralph Fiennes. And it's just wonderful to see these sort of old Vatican style. They really got all of the robes and all of the set deck and all of the production design right. And you feel like you're watching that old... Do you remember that really old movie called Shoes of a Fisherman?
I do not.
Okay, it's all about choosing the Pope, and it's very similar to that. This is what happens when you grow up watching these films. So that's going to be good. But Wicked, okay. Wicked is probably the biggest film next to Gladiator 2 of this season. It's part 1 of 2. I have yet to see it, but it is supposed to be amazing.
When will you know whether that is true or not?
Well, I'm actually going to the cast and crew. That's why I haven't seen it yet.
Well, we look forward to hearing all about it. Karen Krizanovich, thank you as always for joining us. That is all for this edition of The Briefing. It was produced by Hassan Anderson. Our researcher was Gunnar Grunlid and our studio manager was Elliot Greenfield. The Briefing returns on Monday at the same time, midday London. I'm Andrew Muller. Thanks for listening.